Hello and welcome back. In this lecture, we're going to learn about Azure Load Balancing with demo. So this is going to be the second lecture on Azure Load Balancer, and this should be even the final lecture on Azure Load Balancer. So what we're going to do within this lab is we will be spinning up two virtual machines with a name called VM01 and 02, and we would install web server role on both the machines. So that's nothing but IIS role I will be installing on VM01 and 02. And what I'll do is I'll a little bit do the changes for the home page, where if I browse on the VM01 I can able to see it is actually coming from VM01, and similar configuration I'm gonna do here. So once I browse here as a VM01, that's HTTP VM01, I will be able to see VM01, and similarly here VM02. And later point I will attach to the load balancer by configuring health probes and other all configuration. That being said, let's go to the Azure portal and see what we have so far. So within this Azure portal, within this configuration, you have a resource group called demo NLBAS ASG, and within this resource group you have two virtual machines that are already created. It's just a plain virtual machines like VM01 and 02, and these two virtual machines are connected to a virtual network called VNet. That's a VNet. So if you can check out here the VNet name, it will be visible as the demo NLBSG VNet. And if I just log into this virtual machine, and I did already configure going back to the server roles and installing the web server role. And post to that, what I've done is I have done a little bit changes to the www root file, which is this file. So I simply added a word called VM01, so that this is actually coming from VM01. That's a host name. And if I try to browse, since I already installed the web application or the web services, I can browse with the IP address also, like VM01 is coming up. And if I try to browse with the computer name, I'm also getting. And same thing, what we have so far on VM02, we were able to browse since the web application is already installed, and we did a little bit changes to the file of ISStat file. And what we're going to do is now we will be actually creating a network load balancer, and we will associate these two virtual machines as we have seen within this PPT or within this deck. Like we will be introducing load balancer, and then we attach these two. So when I browse from outside, because this NLB will have a public IP, and when I try to browse, I should be able to get a request either from VM01 or VM02. And in case if VM01 gets down, I should be able to get a request from VM02. And if you look at the configuration, how to configure this is very critical in terms of configuring for choosing what type of SKU we need to choose. Let's see, I have a configuration here to look at about SQS. Like, let me open up that link and show you here. Like if I just go back to the NLBs, I didn't even attach to the Azure overview lecture about these SKUs, about Azure Load Balancer SKU. If not, you can go back to Load Balancer /SKUs. And there's a comparison when you're trying to create, you would get as a basic load balancer as well as the standard load balancer. When you go with the standard load balancer, you get all the benefits that are available or that are coming up with the load balancer, and it is a little bit cost also, but you can test all the configuration and you can just go through these. Like this gives you the advantage of the zone redundant configurations can be configured, and also high availability ports can be tested. So all that specific things can be done, and you can go and configure the standard load balancer for this demo. So I'm going to do the standard load balancer. Later point you can check out SKUs specific comparison between basic and standard. So I'll just go back to Azure portal and type here load balancer, and I would get here load balancers, and I don't have anything, so I'm going to create here one, and I'll choose my resource group as demo NLB ASG, and I should be able to give here any of the name to just to identify this NLB. So this is for my web app example, so I'll just give as a web app NLB01, and this is an easy use, and I'm going to choose the public IP base. That means as you know, the two design scenarios that we talked, like if we go for this, if we assign the public IP for this specific load balancer, the people can access any of these virtual machines, web request. Since it's a port 80 we configured, can access anywhere from the internet. Whereas if you configure here internal only, that's a private IP address is assigned, that cannot be accessed outside. So that's where the key difference. So in our case, we are actually trying to use a scenario called the public IP based or public scenario. So I'm going to choose this. And as we discussed about SKUs, you can either choose the basic or standard. As we talked earlier, I'm going to choose the standard, and I'm going to give the public IP name. So this is the web app for NLB my pip. That's the public name address, and you can check out here giving the availability zone. So if I want, I can go for geo redundant, all that. So I can simply go for just the one availability zone which I wanted to configure, and I'm not gonna choose even the IP version 6 if at all. If I wanted, I can choose that too. And post to this, if I just go for tags and create, it's gonna create the NLB. So this takes very quickly it can create about the load balancer, because this is straightforward and we haven't assigned any of the VMs in the backend. As we talked, the deployment is successful. Let's go back to the load balancer and try to configure front end and health backbone, all that configurations. Let's say in your design, if you have multiple IP addresses assigned for your load balancer, you can actually configure from the front end IP configuration. This is where we gave the public IP, which is automatically got created and assigned here with the name of NLB pip or public IP. And if you want more IPs, you can also configure so that they can reach this specific NLB with a multiple different public IP addresses. So this all depends on what kind of configuration you're trying to create. So in the next configuration item is configuring your backend pools. So backend pools are nothing but here the web tier machines like VM01 and 02. And if you remember, we were actually connected to the public IP. So these IPs are, it's not going to show, because the way we want it is these must be having the private IP. So it shouldn't be exposed with the public IP. And so we will try to open up here, try to create a backend pool. It's not going to work actually. Let me show you that. Let's create here a backend pool for web app. So here I can choose my VNet, in this case demo NLB specific VNet, and you see here it says that there's no virtual machines found. This is just because even though these are in the East US and the standard public IP configuration, no public IP configuration for all IP addresses must be configured on the virtual network. So in our case, the public IPs are already configured. So what I'm going to do is I will be actually going back to the Azure portal in a new tab, and I'll remove that public IP because that's not really needed for my requirement also. So I'll just simply go back to my VM01 first and stop this virtual machine, and similarly I'm going to do the VM02 and stop it, and then later point I'll be simply delete the unassign the public IP that is currently assigned for this virtual machine. So both the virtual machines are in a stop state. So I'll just go to overview and the networking, From here, I'll just click on my public IP for my VM02 and simply click on deassociate. That's it. It's not gonna assign, or it's not gonna take the configuration of the public IP. And if I really don't need, even I can delete from here if I really wanted. So once that's done, I'm just going back to the VM01 and I'll repeat the same thing from the networking. I'll click on public IP, that's the NIC public IP, and say deassociate. Now both VMs has been deassociated for the public IP. So I'll just go back here and I'll simply just come back here by changing something here maybe, or just go back here and click on add pool. This time it should actually show me something here. I'll just select my VM name, and if you see here, I am now getting a not the gray button. I can actually browse here, so I'll simply click on add, and this time I'm able to get the VM1 and VM2. So I'll just take these VM1 and VM2. So this will become as the backend pool. So I'll just give here as the web app service. This is a pool 1. That's it, and I simply click on add button. In case if you have already a virtual machine scale set, you can do that even so that it's the same kind of configuration that is available on your scale machines, and you can also configure the auto scaling, all that configuration along with the front end as the network load balancer. That would take care of a lot of load. So in our case, just the virtual machines, click on add. So that's going to validate and come back, and it will create the backend pool, and it's going to attach here in a minute or so. And that's about the backend pool. So after that, we're going to create the health probes. So it has just completed the deployment of these backend apps has been allocated, and I can actually start the virtual machines also in the backend, and I'll be doing that as these two virtual machines are currently in a stop state. I'll simply start those virtual machines. That way I can go ahead and start the virtual machine. It was a failed status because the page was not refreshed, so I'm just going to start the VM. So this has taken the start button, and I'll also do for the VM02. I'll start the virtual machine. This is going to start automatically. Now if I come back to my actual NLB configuration, now this is where the health probes to be configured. Let's create the health probe by clicking on add button and give a proper name. Let's say this is for the HTTP specific, so I'll just give as the HTTP probe, and this is not a TCP port, it's going to be HTTP protocol, and this is the path. Let's see if you have some of the files or folders that needs to be validated on a port 80, then you can give here you can give here maybe a folder or all that content, but in our case it's going to be the entire website root. And this is for the intervals of every 5 seconds it's going to check, and if it is reported as a 2 consequent failures, it treated as the unhealthy. So I'm just clicking on OK. That takes a minute or so to create this health probe. So what we have done so far is we created the front-end IPs. If really wanted, we can have multiple IPs, and the backend we configured 2 virtual machines that will connect to this front-end IP address. So these front-end pool, that the 2 VMs will be validated on this specific health probe about HTTP protocol based on a port IT for the entire root, and if anything is reported as 2 consequent unhealthy status within the 5 seconds, it's going to report us back. That's how we have configured so far. So that being said, now we didn't configure it how the load balance will happen. So all we have done is where are our backend pools, that's the virtual machines, and where is our health probe to validate that 2 virtual machines health status. But we didn't configure anything balancing rules. So this is where you're going to configure the load balancing rules. So just click on add. This is going to be a proper rule which you need to configure. So I just gave here a name as the NLP rule 1, and this is going to be for IP version 4, and on a protocol TCP and the port IT, backend port also IT, that's a request. And this is the pool that we created as a backend and health probe, which is going to validate and port IT. Now this is very important, like session persistence, like let's see a user connected from internet, and he's trying to open the website and he's trying to do some kind of drafting or maybe some kind of customization within a VM01, because the session is handed over with the help of the load balancer to the user from VM01. Let's say if he's trying to again re-enter or redo the some kind of changes, it will try to go and connect to VM01 only, because he's already on top of VM01 and his current session is going on. So that's called the persistence. We can configure based on the client IP address or maybe client IP and the protocol also. So that's where it's going to tag up and it's going to check that configuration. This is also sometimes called as a sticky sessions, and you can configure that. And idle time for timeout for closing this connection for the end users, you can configure here. And TCP rest you can configure, and floating IP address. And regarding the floating IP is mostly used by your SQL Server for always on kind of options, and the rest of the things are just the normal. So I'm just clicking on OK. This is going to be creating a load balancing rule for us. Now it's time for us to look at what happens when we try to browse from the front-end IP address. So in this case 20.55.16.87, and simply open up a web page and click on opening this. So you see here we got the VM02 session is open automatically. And also why this is opened from the VM02 is we did even configure a port to open from the network security group also, which I didn't told you in the beginning of what we have done, but I just forgot. And you can also need to open the port from the network security group, because without opening the port it will not allow the inbound traffic to these virtual machines, because on top of this virtual machine you have NSG configured. Similar configuration we also have done for the VM02 as well as for the VM01. We did enabled the NSG configuration. Like if I just go back to the VM02 and the networking and select my NSG, in this case this is the NSG, and you can check out here the port is configured to allow port IT here as the allow traffic has been allowed. That's why I'm able to browse successfully here. And you see here if I just try to refresh, I'm always getting the VM02. What happens if I try to shut down or to stop my VM02? So I'm just going to stop this server, that's a VM02, and we try to browse this. What will happen? So it's going to check and simply it should fail and fall back to VM01, and the page is loaded as VM01 this time. That's how you can configure the entire NLP. But this important thing is the backend pool machines do not have RDP port enabled publicly. If you are trying to connect, how you're going to configure that. So that's where as the NAT rules comes into the picture, where what you can do is you can actually configure the front-end IP with your load balancer, and you can go for a custom port where 3389 can be mapped to a custom port mapping, and that way you can actually log into your RDP port. And you can learn more about the NAT rules, which is useful for the network address translation. Similar configuration, let's say you are trying to reach from port 80, but in the backend is a different port, so you can do that custom port mapping with the help of NAT rules. So these topics we also talk in the network as a network firewall concepts also. That's where we also talk about the NAT rules. You can also check out the NAT rule configuration which is provided within the documentation link. But in general what you can do is you can actually give your port IT and let's say, or maybe a 443 example, and that should be port map should to 3389. That's how you can configure so that it's actually goes from the 443, but at the end it's gonna hand it over to 3389. That's how you can configure, and you can do the RDP, but make sure that your NSGs also should allow 3389 port or 443 port specific requirements to be allowed. That concludes this entire lecture on network load balancer. I hope this entire lecture is useful for you. Thank you for watching this. We'll catch you in the next lecture.